Right, you're good.
Awesome. Welcome everyone to week number 6. We're very excited to be in this week. I'm sure you are too. These are probably questions in finance that you've had since week 1. So I'm glad we're getting to that this week. If you have any questions, I know Sandra has been grading all of your assignments. If you have any questions about your coursework, just reach out to her. If you're behind in coursework, just reach out to her, let her know so that she can have an expectation of when to receive it. We only have 1 week left after this week, so we need to make sure that you get caught up on those assignments if you have some lingering. So sorry, I might be a little distracted. For some reason, the cat that never pays attention to me is now sitting on my armchair and wanting my piece of pizza. So I might be a little distracted as we go through this. She's been pawing. Anyways, again, welcome everyone. I'd like to introduce 2 speakers with us today. I always flub his last name, and I've known him for almost 4 years, but we have Ken Walsleben.
You're getting better. You're getting better.
I'm getting better and better. And we have Eva Brown. Both have spoke at many of our programs in the past. Both are experts in their fields. Both have instructed in areas on access to capital, and also have experience in working in those areas as well. So they've they don't just know about it, but they've experienced it and live it, and some are currently living it now. So I also know that Ken has been part of he's an entrepreneur as well. So he kind of has that general knowledge as well of entrepreneurship. Eva has been has been instructing for our VWise program for years and is very familiar with the demographic that we serve. So, and I posted the bios on Blackboard, but if you guys could just take a minute, Eva, I'll throw it to you first. If you could just introduce yourself and just give a little bit of background on your experience, and then we'll throw it over to Ken for the same thing, and then we'll get started with questions.
Great, thanks, Deanna. Thanks everyone for having me tonight. Super excited to be here. So I am Eva Brown in my current role. I am the Corporate Community Economic Development Lending and Investment Manager at Fifth Third Bank, which is a Midwest, what we call super regional bank. And my job there is really to help the bank meet its Community Reinvestment Act obligations, and so that we're lending and investing in low to moderate income areas across our footprint. So I work really closely with all of our lines of businesses to make sure that we have the right strategies and products to meet those demands. I've spent most of my career in banking, but actually on the lending side. So as Deanna mentioned, I've got a kind of vast amount of experience both in underwriting, portfolio management, underwriting small businesses, as well as middle market sized companies. Actually spent a little bit of time at a nonprofit where I started up a loan fund for those businesses that after the recession back in 2008, 2009, when they weren't able to go to the bank, the organization that I worked for, we successfully raised money and were able to continue to fund those businesses prior to moving into the community development space. In my off hours, which are very few, I wear a couple of different hats. I also chair a board of a community development financial institution that was established solely for the purpose of expanding access to capital to underserved entrepreneurs. I also serve on the board of the Women's Business Development Center, which is a small business technical assistance organization that works throughout the Midwest. So again, happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Eva, and welcome. Over to you, Ken.
Okay, so depending on the group, depends on what kind of hat I wear. So I'm going to wear my entrepreneurial hat tonight. I started a business just as you folks are starting yours. I started mine way back in the early 90s to be a finance company, to provide financing to growing entrepreneurial firms throughout the US. And I did so using a financial technique called invoice discounting, or sometimes referred to as factoring. Which maybe later on we can kind of give an example of or an explanation of, because it's been my experience that few, if any, people have ever heard of it, let alone understand its nuances. But like you folks, I had to raise money. I had to grow a business. I had to figure out a market. By the time I sold my business, probably 6 years ago now, I had a $10 million bank line. I had another $5 million in subordinate debt. Had a group of equity investors. So I guess in many regards, I've kind of been there, done that. Since then, I've decided to take a change of career. I hit that midlife crisis and decided that a career change is in order. I had been an entrepreneur for about 25 years and I wanted to do something a little different. I had been teaching here at Syracuse University in the evenings part-time and realized that that was really spinning my propeller. So I decided to make a full-time change in my life. I sold out of my business and became a professor here at the Whitman School at Syracuse University. I've been teaching now, entering my 6th year. I've been having a ball, teaching primarily entrepreneurship and turnarounds, how to turn a business around. As it relates to our group, I've been working with the Institute for Veterans, Military Families since its beginning. Prior to joining the faculty at Syracuse, I was a guest lecturer. I've worked with each of the EBV on campus events that have occurred over those years, as well as traveled around the globe a little bit and training some of you folks as you were separating from the service in the Boots to Business program. So I've tried to be as active as I can for your community because frankly, I really believe in you guys and believe in what you're about to be doing. So that's sort of some background for me. I'm guessing that Eva and I are the targets tonight for every one of you who are going to say, where am I going to get money? I need money. I need it right away. And most of the time I'm going to defer to Eva. So get ready, Eva. but we'll do our dead level best to kind of fill you guys in as best we can about all that is in front of you in terms of alternatives.
Great, thank you so much, Ken. So I will start it off with just one of the questions just to get us going. And then just as always for the class, feel free to either type your question in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked, or wave your hand or raise your hand and you can unmute yourself and I'll throw it to you to ask your question live. And then for Eva and Ken, feel free. We may have direct questions for specific one or the other, but feel free to tag on to each other as we take these questions.
Year-old woman, he goes, well, I'm a 90-year-old man. I go, yeah.
Unique experiences. Just a reminder, if you're logging in, just please stay muted until you're going to ask a question, and that'll really help for recording purposes and for everybody to be able to hear properly. So, all right, with that being said, I'm just going to start with an easy one. We have some, I would say an easier one. We have some, about a good majority of the class was expecting to attend an EBV residency program. Some of them have already started a business, but some are still really in that ideation phase. And so some of this might be a little bit of a review, and some this is brand new information. So with that being said, could you please kind of educate us on what are the different types of bank and community lending options? So what are the different types of funding? How can we get money for our business?
Eva, why don't you take that one? That's right up your alley.
Yeah, sure. I'll start. So traditional bank debt obviously is probably the cheapest debt you can get. But with that being said, banks take a very little amount of risk. So while it's the cheapest amount of cheapest cost of debt, it's a little bit difficult to procure, especially if you're a younger business. A lot of it has to do with the fact that banks typically look backwards when trying to underwrite a credit. So when we're taking a look at a package, we're looking to see how did the business perform historically to give us a good prediction of what it will do in the future. And then that will determine the capacity to borrow. And as you can imagine, as a startup, without having that history, it makes it a little bit more challenging. And therefore, the analysis then turns to really heavily weighted on the guarantor, which is the owner, right? Anyone that has typically more of a 20% ownership stake you know, would have to, you know, look at their personal credit, their liquidity, all those different things, and then take a peek at the business plan and financial projections. So I'll be, you know, completely transparent and honest. Banks are just not that flexible, right? There are guidelines in place, and you know, and if they're smaller loans, there's just not a lot of wiggle room. So the question was about, what about community lenders? And I get really excited about this topic. So I'll talk about one specifically, which is what I mentioned in my intro, which is community development financial institutions. I think they're a very little known secret. A lot of folks do not know about these CDFIs. So they are typically nonprofit organizations, although they don't have to be, and they receive a certification from the U.S. Treasury, in that their mission is to make sure that they're serving a population that typically doesn't have equal access to credit. So, for example, I serve as the board chair of an organization called Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives Microfinance Group. And what makes it interesting, especially for younger businesses, while they underwrite businesses similar to a bank, so we're looking at cash flow, collateral, we don't have these hard, fast kind of numbers that we have to go off of. Banks typically, when you're borrowing smaller amounts of money, and when I say small, let's call it $250,000 and below, it's usually going through an algorithm, right? So there's not really this manual underwriting process to really understand the business opportunity. CDFIs are the exact opposite. They underwrite they understand the numbers, but they really want to know the story. So those CDFIs, they're responsible lenders. They're typically capitalized by banks. So that's a part of my job at Fifth Third, is I'm using the bank's money on our balance sheet to put it on CDFI's balance sheets so that they can make the loans that we can't make. And so I always suggest for folks to look up CDFIs. If you go to the Treasury website, there's a directory where who from, you know, what lender from your state, you know, where are the lenders in your state and what they specialize in. So I'll kind of stop there and can definitely do any follow-up on that.
Yeah, I would echo how great CDFIs fit into the overall picture. I'm really glad to hear about Eva's connection to them. I like to explain to people that, you know, when it comes to bank funding, there's no more cheaper form of institutional capital on planet Earth. I mean, it's not dilutive. You're not having to give up a piece of your business. But as Eva points out, it is also tight. And banks are not risk takers. Banks are all about managing risk. So if you can qualify for traditional bank financing, it's a beautiful thing. As Eva correctly pointed out, though, banks look at previous history, and that's not our strong point as startup entrepreneurs. So the idea of the CDFIs has come into vogue in recent years, and it still remains really under the radar. Really, you know, very, very misunderstood, or just people are not aware of it. A lot of times, you know, people that are in the industry, the financial industry, are not up to speed on these. So to the extent that you can find access to a CDFI who can get you money, you know, at terms that make sense, head that way. It's a beautiful thing.
Thank you both for that. I'll be saying thank you after every question. It's just something that I do. So apologize if that gets daunting. But so we have another question from Bob. Bob is wondering, how do we attract angel investors? And then we'll go to Tiana's question after that.
Eva, can I try starting with this one? I raised money from angel investors. First off, let's understand that you have to knock on a lot of doors before you finally find the right one. It's very rare that you're going to find happiness in the first door that you knock on. Let's understand the motivations of angel investors. Angel investors are themselves individuals. They're people that typically are retired or semi-retired. They've made some money in their career. They want to stay in the game. They want to stay engaged. If you watch the TV show Shark Tank, while the title Shark makes for great television, what you're really watching are angel investors in action. They're dealing with their own pockets, their own wallets. They're making their own decisions. And they are motivated by possible profits and growth. That's their motivation. Oftentimes we're asked, where do you find them? It's not like you can open up the phone book and look for Angels Are Us. So what you have to do is kind of network around. Every community has a chamber of commerce. Most chambers of commerce will keep a list of regional people that have expressed an interest in being angel investors. You also will find your way through networking through what we call your bail team, whether it be your banker, your accountant, your insurance person, or your lawyer. They're going to be able to open doors for you and introduce you to potential angel investors. At the end of the day, though, you've got to be prepared for what they want to know. All right, they're needing to look at typically a full business plan. They want to see the growth prospects. That's what motivates them. Whereas Eva's bank, as she's explained, she's very credit driven. Angel investors are opportunity driven. All right, they're not as concerned with what you've done already, but rather what you're going to do. So angel investors typically will get involved with areas of their own personal expertise. The group of people that I eventually landed with when I started my business were themselves finance guys. They grasped what I was looking to do. Many of the people that had said no to me didn't have that kind of background. So you've got to get talking to the right people at the right time. And that sort of will open that door to angel investors. But at the end of the day, it's all about finding a commonality of interest between what you want and what they desire as well.
Thank you, Ken. Eva, do you have anything to add to that? You don't have to add to every question, just.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add, I think, Ken just did a really good job, is that often I think when people think investors, they think about, hey, I've got an idea, I need an investor. I think I just want to underscore the importance that investors, you've got to have proof of concept and kind of be out the starting gate prior to being able to attract that type of capital, because as Ken mentioned, they're opportunity driven. So without that proof of concept and slight track record, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. So, I just like to, kind of keep that in the forefront.
Great, thank you so much. Tiana has a question. I believe she's not on video today, but she is listening. She is starting a service-based company in cannabis. Since the industry isn't federally legalized, she has found it difficult to find funders. Do you have any recommendations of where she can look for funding?
I might be able to help a little bit there, but I'll defer to Eva if she's got better ideas. The problem that Tiana references is a problem that is pervasive throughout the cannabis industry. Quite literally, federally chartered banks and financial institutions are unwilling to even accept deposits, let alone lend money to the cannabis industry. They just look at the money as kind of being radioactive and don't want to threaten their charter and license through the federal government. And a great number of West Coast cannabis companies have had a really hard time trying to figure out, what do we do? They're cash-based, they have a lot of cash, and they have nowhere to put it except their mattress. What they've found is in some cases, there are state-level financial institutions, not federally chartered, but state chartered, who have looked at this industry and said, we think we want to deal with this industry. Frankly, there's a long line of cannabis companies at their doors saying, we're ready, but please accept our deposits, we need to do business. But it is still an emerging sort of world right now, and it's kind of hit or miss. There is no simple, geez, go do this, Tiana, kind of answer. It is a problem that's present, it's festering, it continues to fester. No one's got a great answer other than to kind of pursue the state chartered institutions. Eva, have you encountered anything like that in the Midwest?
Yeah, no, it's exactly what you said. With that, with the federal regulations, it makes it very difficult for those companies. The two things that come to mind, at least in my experience when it comes to raising money or getting money for these companies, one, and I'm not sure obviously of your background, but in Illinois, they have a very robust social equity program for these kind of emerging cannabis companies, in which these companies get access to these different funding sources, their private funding sources. And if I remember correctly, the definition of social equity and who can be kind of accepted as that categorization, it's really, really wide, right? Like, it's like, oh, do you know anyone personally that's been impacted by marijuana when it was illegal in the state? And if you knew someone, you say yes, you can qualify for the social equity program. So I would suggest kind of looking, and I think a lot of states that are kind of legalizing it, you know, they've got programs very similar. Like I know in Colorado, they've got it in some other states as well. The other thing is, like we mentioned in the first question, Community Development Financial Institution, CDFI. So like I mentioned, I serve on the board of one, and we're actually exploring that right now. We're able to kind of segregate our federal funds versus our other funding. And we're making an affirmative decision that we can indeed fund this business because we are not using our federal funds. Now, obviously, you're not going to raise millions of dollars from CDFIs to do things like that, but for some kind of initial capital to maybe get started, that may be something to look at.
Hey, Eva, why don't we go start up a bank?
We should.
I see an entrepreneurial opportunity here for us.
There's definitely an opportunity there. Huge. Let's follow up.
Look at that. We not only train veterans to be business owners, but we match our instructors to be entrepreneurs, co-ventures. Speaking of joint ventures, did you like that transition? Bob asked the question early on, and I figured we'll just mention it now, and then I'll move to Natasha's question. He's wondering, how important are joint ventures today?
Bob, can you be more specific?
We'll let Bob put something in. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm on mic. I apologize.
That's fine.
Just seeking other companies and other client lists, more on the client list, and maybe sharing a stage together. I'm in the coaching and education, motivational speaking kind of an arena, so it probably makes a little more sense possibly in my industry. And it seems like a lot of that joint venturing, sharing of clientele and lists and things on those lines, even products possibly, but what are you guys seeing?
I'm not seeing any dramatic change in that, the prevalence of that today versus yesterday versus last year. I'm not seeing any impact from a COVID standpoint. I will say, Bob, that within your particular chosen industry, it is extremely prevalent and has been, and I think will continue to be. Being able to partner up with someone else who's providing similar but slightly different services allows you guys to tag team and put together events that you might otherwise not be able to pull together, and you have a greater marketing opportunity when you join forces. But I'm not sure that I could point to something and say, geez, joint venturing is the way to go today versus yesterday. Maybe I'm not fully comprehending it. Eva?
Yeah, I would agree. I'm not sure if, there's any kind of emerging need, but I always supportive of joint ventures, especially when talking to folks within this program. And I'm not sure if you guys get to this when you think about like certifications. Like, so if you're all veterans, there's both like federal certifications that can identify your business as veteran owned. And there's different private certifications that do that as well. And essentially what that does is it markets you to corporations and the government that have diverse spending goals, right? So when I think joint ventures, I'm always looking at it from the aspect of a smaller, lower capacity business that wants to attract a larger client. And maybe that larger client wants a business that has maybe more experience or just more resources or capacity. That's where I always see joint ventures working really well, is when you can kind of partner with that larger firm, and the benefit to them and you is that, hey, you're satisfying kind of that diverse buying kind of bucket, and a lot of small businesses have successfully grown that way. Mm-hmm.
Those are great points. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Natasha is wondering, she's there in the video. You can wave, Natasha, so they can see you. She has a question for you, Ken. Could you cover invoice factoring? Well, I guess it's more of a statement, but if you could do that.
Sure, happy to do it. Natasha, it is best described as an alternative form of finance. Unlike equity, it is not dilutive. Meaning that you're not giving up any of your ownership in your business. On the other hand, it is not debt in the traditional sense where it's showing up on your balance sheet as an obligation. So now that I've confused you, I guess probably the simplest way to do this is to perhaps do it by example. Let me presuppose that Deanna is like you folks. She's a growing business person. Her business is growing. And by the way, this only is functional and works in a B2B environment. So for those of you that are selling direct to consumer, this is just general information. This is not going to be an aha moment. However, for those of you that are selling your goods or services to another business, this might be something that you've likely not ever heard of. So let's say Deanna is in the B2B business. She's selling her goods or service, and she's selling it to Eva's bank, Fifth Third Bank. Deanna knows that she's going to get paid by Eva. She sends Eva an invoice that says, please pay me in 30 days. And the problem for Deanna now is that she has to kind of sit on her hands. And she's going to go to her mailbox every day, hoping that there's a check in there from Fifth Third Bank. And 25 days is going to go by, and 30 days is going to go by. And I mean, no disrespect to Fifth Third, but it's quite probable that it will be sometime after 30 days that they find their checkbook and send out a check. In the meantime, Deanna's got a business to run. She's got cash flow needs. And she needs to pay her bills. She needs money to put out her next order. She needs to pay her staff. She has taxes to pay. You get the idea. And the fact that Eva's business, Fifth Third, owes Deanna money doesn't pay her bills. Deanna needs cash today. She can go to a company like mine, which was in the invoice factoring business, and she can say, hey, Ken, I've got this invoice for $10,000 to Fifth Third Bank. They're good for it. They're going to make payment. Here's the proof that I've delivered on my goods or service. Can you give me money today? And quite literally what's going to happen is I'm going to buy Deanna's rights to that invoice. This is why it's not debt. This is quote unquote a sale transaction. I don't mean to go down any legal rabbit holes, but the point is that Deanna sends me a copy of the invoice, and I will give Deanna money on 2 different occasions for that invoice. On the first occasion is on the day Deanna wants to do this, I'm going to give her 80% of that invoice. That's the first of 2 payments she gets. And so if it was a $10,000 invoice, Deanna gets $8,000 from me. And this is when Deanna wants it, it's her choice, and she gets it. Now, eventually, we're going to tell Fifth Third that, hey, when you guys find your wallet, when you get around to sending out the check, send Deanna's check over to my P.O. box. I'm going to get that check for $10,000 at some future point in time. When I get that check, I'm going to clear it. I'm going to reimburse myself the $8,000 that I already gave Deanna. And then from the remaining $2,000, which is, after all, that's Deanna's money, I'm going to retain a fee. On average, my fee worked out across my entire portfolio to 3% per invoice. So in a $10,000 invoice, my fee was $300. So that leaves $1,700 left over for Deanna. I send that back to her that same day. So between payment 1 and payment 2, Deanna's got 97 cents on the dollar, $9,700. And she's gotten $8,000 upfront when she needed it most. At no time does Deanna personally guarantee. At no time does Deanna take on debt. At no time does Deanna have to give up a piece of her business. She is simply turning an asset called an invoice into another asset called cash so that she can run her business. This is a really interesting tool for probably about half of you guys that are in the B2B environment, because this is a way for you to avoid having to get other forms of financing. It is not the cheapest form of financing. I make no bones about it. Eva's bank money is the cheapest money you're going to be able to get. But this fits a need, it fits a niche for certain kinds of businesses that are rapidly growing. I did that for 25 years. My last year in business, we did $50 million in business. Okay, so this is a rapidly growing kind of form of finance. The more people learn about it, the more interested they become. I've just taken what is a rather complex subject and kind of smoothed it out, simplified it into about 3 minutes there, but hopefully that gives you a sense of what that's all about.
Thank you very much, Ken. We have another question, and she will ask it live. Helena, feel free to ask your question.
Okay, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. My question is in terms of bootstrapping using grants in order to do that. Do either of you have a recommended source of finding grants that are specifically for startup businesses, not including like pitch competitions, that, you know, plain grant sources?
I can start. So I think, so I'm going to start off with kind of the normal answer. The normal answer is, I think there's a myth that there's this whole kind of swath of grant free money for startup businesses, and that's just simply not true. You know, there's just not a lot of different, you know, it's just not there, right? Because that's just people taking money, you know, and just giving it out for the sole purpose of someone else being able to get their business up and running. So when you think about sources, they can, I'm not saying they never come up, but, you know, go to your chambers of commerces, or I always suggest for folks to make sure that they're kind of plugged in an entrepreneurial network, kind of like the program that you're in now, because often when those programs do become available, you know, we like to filter them through small business organizations to get awareness. Now, I will say this, given what's happening with COVID, civil unrest and everything that's going on, I can, you know, say, at least in my industry amongst my peers, there is a concern that not only are we trying to save small businesses, but we also know that there's unfortunately a lot of small businesses that are not going to be able to kind of come out on the other side of this. And so how do we solve is, we know there's now an urgency to kind of have more new small businesses kind of come out, right? So the ownership rate is going down. We need more entrepreneurs. And a lot of the conversations that are being had as well, what is the best source of capital? And it's, you know, they want, oh, it's investment capital or grant capital. So what I would say is keep your ear to the ground, because these programs are coming. I mean, you can kind of Google, just earlier this week, Wells Fargo did a huge announcement about donating their PPP loan fees, and a lot of that is going to go into these different pools, and they're going to be marketed towards diverse entrepreneurs. So I would just say, you know, just, you know, kind of make sure that you're plugged into the network. But as a normal course of business, there's just not a whole lot of grant opportunities for small businesses, startups, and that's, you know, just the unpopular truth, I have to say.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Eva said. There is no honeypot that you can, you know, you have the secret code and you can open and you're going to find out all the different grants. I will, however, suggest to you that the grants tend to be, with the except, you know, with some notable exceptions like the Wells Fargo example, they tend to be very micro-local. They tend to be smaller dollars and not well known. So where do you go for that kind of information? I would suggest you consider going to the small business development centers in your community. The SBDCs, as we refer to them, they're plugged in, and they're plugged into not only what's going on with the SBA, they're a part of an arm of the Small Business Administration, but they also have their ear to the ground, to use Eva's phrase. They really know what's going on in the local scene that might be able to open a door. They know of something or some program that's going on that you should be aware of. So I would, you know, as you build out that network, as you try and figure out where to go, I would tell you to knock on that door for sure, because they might have that key that you're looking for.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Moving on to the next question, Lamar. He has a question. He'll ask that live. Go ahead, Lamar.
Hello. Thanks for being here and providing us with good information. I think it's great. My question is also related to bootstrapping, but I was trying to figure out when you're starting a business with like on your own, and you're kind of getting into a situation where you're trying to increase the awareness and the value of it. You had talked Eva, you had talked a little bit about what businesses would be looking for in regards to investment. When should someone who's bootstrapping or trying to do it themselves be in a position where they know that they're setting themselves up for some success with a bank?
So I can try to start with that answer. So I always say, when you're looking to borrow money, you're typically borrowing money for growth, right? So not necessarily, there's a lot of folks that look to borrow money to plug a hole because you want to, you know, you don't have enough, but there's not necessarily the opportunity right in front of you to earn that revenue. So I'd like to always have entrepreneurs think about when you take a loan, you've got to start repaying that back immediately. And if you haven't projected out what your business cash flow looks like to be able to repay that debt, then that's probably not a right time to borrow. So if you're in a business and you're just getting started and you're not quite sure what your revenue mix is, who it's coming from, then is it the appropriate time to really take on debt? Because, do you want to take on debt without being able to repay it? So there's two things to also think about. Short term, I think Ken did a great job explaining about how factoring works, and that's simply or a line of credit, because like, hey, I sold something, I'm waiting for the money. This is what I borrow for. Another reason to borrow is an investment, because you want to invest into something, an asset that will repay, that will earn the money to help repay the debt. So my suggestion is to be ready. It's just make sure you understand what you're borrowing for. It should be a growth opportunity, and whatever it is you're borrowing for, that asset, whatever, it could be a person, it could be a thing, will it earn enough revenue or profit to repay that debt?
Lamar, if I could, I'd like to add just a couple other things to piggyback onto Eva's point. She made some very good ones. Let's remember that bootstrapping is kind of, one of the objectives of bootstrapping is to defer or delay or reduce your need for outside capital, okay? Whether it be bank funding or investment capital or whatever. The bootstrapping, you're finding creative ways as an entrepreneur to avoid having to pass the hat, right? So your question in part was, well, how do I know when to be done with bootstrapping and when to reach out for that outside help? I will tell you, never stop bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is in our lifeblood as entrepreneurs. We rub the face off a nickel. I mean, we are cheap, let's be honest, okay? That's what we do. But don't ever lose that quality. Now, the question about what to do when, in large part, I think we would likely agree that it depends on the growth position of your business and what you're doing and how you're doing it. By example, if you're just a seed stage business or just getting started, sometimes debt is not the best place to go. As Eva correctly pointed out, debt has to be repaid almost immediately. Sometimes it's friends and family and other folks who might be able to provide an equity investment, because that's not capital that's going to hurt your cash flow for a while, if ever. So depending on where your company is in its life cycle and its maturity phase will dictate, do I go down the debt road or do I go down the equity road, or do I just put my head down and keep on bootstrapping? Does that help at all?
Yeah, it does. And I think my sort of, just my industry is sort of restaurant industry. I'm thinking about opening up a hot dog, sort of a regional hot dog business. And I'm leveraging against getting a brick and mortar or a food truck. Mm-hmm. So if I do the food truck route and start, being successful and getting awareness, then you're going to think about, well, where you're going to put that business. And in my mind, I'm thinking about the capital that you're going to need to sort of project what you're going to be overall spending. And, on the finance side, I got to learn a lot about that. So I'd be looking at professionals to sort of look at what I'm making and all of those things to help me understand that kind of decision when I need to. And I think would you recommend getting with someone in the finance industry, and who would that be?
Potentially, even if I could start maybe, and you'll probably want to jump in on this. Lamar, if you were one of my students, I would ask you a few kind of pertinent questions here, which is, in this day of COVID, why would you want a brick and mortar? Okay, nobody's allowed in brick and mortar depending on where you're located, and those that are allowed are afraid to go in it. Okay, so I would steer you strongly towards a food truck. So now the next question becomes, well, how do you afford to finance the food truck? You can either find financing through friends and family. You're not likely going to get debt money. I think Eva would concede the fact that food trucks are not high on her list of desired credits to lend to, especially startup ones at that. But remember, part of bootstrapping, which was the term you asked about earlier, can involve ways to obtain seller financing. who are you buying it from? Are they willing to perhaps work something out? I have an old phrase that I'll probably regret because Sandra is recording this. But it goes like this with regard to bootstrapping. Never buy when you can lease. Never lease when you can borrow. Never borrow when you can steal. Okay? So the idea here, that I turned a few heads on that one. The idea here is to find ways to get that food truck up and running, and that might include making a deal with the seller, okay, as opposed to going out and passing the hat and finding financing. Because clearly the seller has an incentive to work with you, don't they? Eva?
That was great advice. Definitely was going to go down that road. The only thing that I would add as it relates to, maybe working with someone to identify the best financing option, I think that's a good thing. And I think we talked about the SBDC network. They've got folks within that network that, when I worked at Women's Business Development Center, we were an SBDC and I was the director of access to capital, and my sole job was to understand what the whole universe of financing for small businesses was. And those small businesses came in and talked to me and presented what it is they were looking for, and I connected them. So definitely check out that network. But even if you are working with a professional to kind of link you to the right financing source, I can't underscore the importance of understanding and being able to articulate your own financial story. So even though you're leaning on someone for help, you've got to be able to talk about your story, your business, and kind of how it manifests itself through the numbers. So whenever you're talking about money or lending, I'm here to tell you, you always want to lead with how are you going to pay it back, and not just, oh, I'll make money, but what does that firm plan look like? Because that is ultimately what ties you back to the finance sources, how you can repay it.
One last point, Deanna, within the educational material that the folks are looking at, do you folks talk about SCORE at all? Service Corps of Retired Executives?
So we mention it in, so there's a video called SBA Resources, and SCORE is mentioned in there. We don't focus on that a lot. They will get an optional webinar. Well, it's a webinar that's recorded that everybody will receive to watch. Follow on to this class sometime during a week 8, which isn't a part of the course, but it's just an added bonus that they can have. And that we will discuss different resources in their communities as well as other resources that IVMF has. Okay,
so Lamar, just to underscore that point, pardon the pun, the Service Corps of Retired Executives goes by the acronym SCORE. It is an SBA-based organization, just like the small business centers and the small business development centers. SCORE could, you asked who can I go to, who's going to have opinions, who can help guide me. These are people that have been there, done that. They're typically retired, they're business executives, and they do it for you for free. So that would be a great place for you to go seek counsel from.
And there's probably one in your area. The easiest thing to do, Lamar, right now is just to Google SCORE and your city, and then see what comes up closely. Or you can go to the SBA's website. I'll put the link in the chat as soon as I find it. You can search the closest SCORE there. So great.
Just to
great.
add on to the thing about the SCORE.
Yeah.
They're hosting Tuesday and Thursday live sessions that are nationwide. They started doing it during COVID. So you can go on every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon from like 2 p.m. to probably about 5 or 6. And they have national SCORE representatives who can answer all the questions that you have. And they have a lot of corporate resources. So FedEx and other companies that have come up with creative grant opportunities, they're all posted within that SCORE chat room. So I'll see if I can find the link and post it. I don't know how to do that though, but I will try.
Thank you very much, Helene. I appreciate it. All right, we move into a question that Elton had. He had to hop off. He had another engagement, but wanted to make sure his question got asked because he's going to watch the replay, so to see what he missed. He is at the point in his business, he has a counseling business, and he's at the point where he needs to hire someone. And he's trying to figure out financially, what does he need to know to determine whether he should hire an employee versus a contractor. And, if there's any, financial reasons why he should do one over the other. You know, I'm sure there are HR reasons as well. So I'd like to get your opinions on that.
I wouldn't know how to boil that down into a short soundbite. That is a big, big
right?
question. So Elton's facing, it sounds like, his first hire, which in the life of any entrepreneur is a scary event. You've got to be able to make it right, and it's a big jump, and it's for the first time in life you're going to have to be responsible for the income of someone else and their career ambitions. One of the things that we don't touch on an awful lot, at least in my experience through Syracuse, and maybe we should, is all the things that change once you become an entrepreneur, once you become an employer. The costs and the regulations of compliance as an employer are amazing. Okay, they're not for the weak-kneed. I have a personal bias, and it is just that it's a bias. I'm not in a position to know enough about Elton's circumstance to give him a hard answer. My general bias is to avoid making people employees if you can legally, legitimately work with them as an independent contractor. And I emphasize legally and legitimately, and if I could, I would put that in italics, because I don't want you to run afoul of IRS regulations. There are specific rules that confirm whether someone is, and their work is truly that of an independent contractor versus an employee. But if you can do it under the independent contractor route, that to me is pretty tempting. Eva?
No, I think you said it perfectly. The only thing that I could always point out is that those pesky IRS regulations, and just making sure that you have an expert, a tax expert, a legal expert to kind of guide you on that. Those issues get very tricky, and I always suggest to kind of seek the professionals to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, eventually we'll get to a point where you're going to have employees in the traditional sense. Mm-hmm. I would also, again, speaking from a bias standpoint, guide you with strong hand towards a third-party payroll processor, somebody like a Paychex or an ADP who can comply with all those regulations on your behalf and keep you legal. You don't want to do this on the cheap, trying to do it on on your own. It's fraught with a lot of risk.
Thank you very much. So I have a question from Angela, and then I'll go to Jason. These are all in the chat right now. So Angela is starting a life coach business. She says, I don't think I need much money for startup since the service will be bringing in money as I go, but I feel like maybe I'm not accounting for things I may need money for startup. Can you talk about how to know what you need and how much money you need for a service type business like life coaching?
So I can start, and I think whether it be life coaching or any type of business, what's really important as you're developing your business plan is those financial projections. And so I would suggest, I hate to keep referring back to the SBA, but I know that's like a universally used source, but, they've got good templates that really list out all the different categories of startup expenses that may be able to point you to some things that you may not think about, right? And it's typically a spreadsheet where you can kind of drop in the numbers and then be able to see, hey, here's my total. So I would say, look for those type of tools. Those are really helpful. And then make sure you do a lot of research on the industry, right? I think that's really key, is really understanding the industry, the opportunity there, look at what some of the competitors are doing, just to really get a gauge of kind of how they operate. I would start there.
And Angela, I would also remind you that you really don't have a lot in the way of upfront expenses for a life coaching business. It's not like you have to go out and buy equipment or buy a facility or hire lots of people or anything of that nature. So to answer your question very succinctly, I would tell you to be prepared financially to go, say, 90 days or 120 days without a paycheck. But during that period of time, you're going to spend money, other than putting it in your own pocket. You're going to spend money to market yourself and to bring on your first clients and go through a pay cycle, which is going to take you 60, 90 days. So that's why I say, on the other side of 90 or 120 days, you might be able to take your first paycheck. But the good news is you don't have a lot of upfront costs other than that.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I forgot I was muted. Like most, that's my life nowadays, forgetting I'm muted as I'm trying to talk on a conference call or team meeting or whatever the case may be. Jason has a question, and this is geared more towards CDFIs. So his question is, he's considering starting his own record label, and he's wondering, how can I go about signing an artist to my record label? Would CDFI be beneficial when it comes to funding the label? That's really what he's getting at with his question there.
So I can start, and unfortunately, I only know a little bit about, I actually don't know much, right, about record labels. You know, I've not really financed one before, but I can maybe speak generally as it relates to CDFI. So CDFIs, they're similar to banks in the sense where it's debt that they're giving you. And typically they're going to start wanting their payments right away. Maybe there's a 3-month interest only period or some sort of delay to give you a ramp up time. So no matter what the business, whether it's a record label, if that signing that artist does not immediately produce revenue to you to repay that debt, then it may not be a good option. So Ken, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Well, you know, you're the expert on CDFIs, and I'm not an expert on record labels in any way, shape, or form, but I will say that you probably can't start it on debt alone, okay? So you might go to that CDFI and get debt funding to augment your initial capital, but you're going to need some initial capital, either your own or through a partner or a co-venture or a joint venture or whatever. You're going to need some startup scratch to get that thing rolling before a CDFI or a bank is going to have interest in giving you debt.
Thank you both very much. Ken, could you please just share some best practices about borrowing money from family and friends?
Yes, I'm happy to do it. In my classes, my students, after a while, repeat with me that it's really 3 F's. It's not just family and friends. It's family, friends, and other fools. Okay? And let's understand that I'm not suggesting that everybody's out there who might lend you money is a fool. I will tell you, however, that rarely are the people that are lending you money doing it for the right reasons. It's not because they're seasoned investors who have scrutinized your business plan and considered all the pros and cons. They're giving you money because of you. Now, I urge you guys in the strongest possible way to document anything that you do. I need to give you a very quick war story that's kind of humorous, but very illustrative of what I referred to. I have a friend. He started his business by getting a $50,000 loan from his uncle. We'll call him Uncle Lou. $50,000, I won't tell you what my friend's business does, but he was successful, okay? After 2.5 years, he had enough money amassed to pay back Uncle Lou, plus an additional $10,000 for interest. And he presented it at the Thanksgiving Day table with great fanfare. He stood up at the head of the table and said, you know, family is just so critical. We all stick together. We're all there for one another. Uncle Lou, you were there for me. When I started my business, I needed cash. You gave me cash. And my business has flourished. It has changed my life. And I owe that all to you. And I'm proud to say that I'm in a position now to pay you back. And he slid an envelope across the table. It was $60,000. He slid it across the table to Uncle Lou. And everybody at the tables, hearts swelled, and everybody was oohing and eyeing, right up until Uncle Lou looked up with an ashen face and said, "What is this? I thought I was your partner." Okay? Now, if that doesn't strike fear into the heart of an entrepreneur, you weren't listening. Now, what does my friend do? Well, the bottom line is my friend is a 50-50 partner today called Uncle Lou. Why? Why? Because he didn't document what was going on. And how after that speech do you say to Uncle Lou, "Oh, no, you were not my partner. That was a loan. I'm just giving you money." No, you can't have that conversation. So because he was foolish and he didn't document that it was debt or that it was equity or that these are the repayment terms or this is the amount of dilution or whatever else it might be, he was the fool. Don't be that person. That's the strongest thing I can tell you relative to how to go about getting money from friends and family and other fools.
Thank you very much. So I have another one that I will ask at the end. I want to ask one before I ask this one. So this is more for Eva, and I know you've touched on it a little bit, but let's say someone wanted to walk into a bank tomorrow and get a loan. What would be the what should they do? The process, like how should they prepare to do that? If I'm explaining that correctly, best practices, so to speak.
Yeah, so I would say some best practices is number one, understanding why you're borrowing money. So don't just arbitrarily say, I need $100,000 for my business, but really get granular with your need and what you're borrowing for, and be prepared to be able to tell the story about how you will repay the debt. And not because you're good, not because your business is awesome or wonderful and that you have a lot of customers, but through the numbers, why you can repay the debt. And so that can be backed up by financial statements. So for those that have been in business, make sure you've got your tax returns or accountant prepare financial statements. If you're new, make sure that you have a business plan, financial projections. Unlike factoring companies, banks do require you guarantee the debt as an owner. So be prepared to talk about your personal financial situation. I think some entrepreneurs, they think like, hey, my business is one thing and I'm something else. While that's true, new businesses, and even as they get large, they're still very closely linked. So they're going to want to know, how's your personal credit? What does your personal debt look like? How have you managed that in the past? So the best thing to prepare is one, know your story, why you're borrowing, and how you're going to pay it back, but also be prepared with that financial package that kind of can back up that story. And you can walk into a bank, that's fine, your own bank, but I always suggest get a referral, right? And you can get a referral from someone in your network, another business owner that may have a banker, a small business support, a technical assistance organization, a CPA that may refer you an attorney. But I always think a referral to a banker is a little bit more warm and friendly than just kind of walking in.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Ken, this is a little more for you. And this is, I know, a whale of a question because I know that the answer is simple or brief. But we touch on it in some of the videos. I don't know if you're familiar with Neil Turallo, who is a director over at Cornell University. He did a couple of videos on financing your business that the class has watched, and he touched on the economic model of business. And I know that you shared that PowerPoint with me, and I did upload it for the class in course documents so that they have that resource. But could you touch on briefly kind of explain what the economic business model is?
Wow, that is a loaded question.
I know.
but not to worry. We'll make it comparatively painless. I was actually thinking of tagging on to Eva's comments to the last question as to what to be conversational about. When
I am so sorry.
No. This is a perfect segue because I was going to say, but I had decided to leave it alone. I was going to say, know your economic model. Now, I know that sounds really silly, but I can't begin to tell you, and the numbers truly are countless, the number of times I had people approach me for funding, who when I asked them, how do you make money in your business, I would get a lot of static on the phone. It's kind of like, wait a minute, this is basic. You guys got to know this. You have to be able to talk the language of entrepreneurship. So what is it? When you talk about an economic model, you're talking about your volumes. All right, are you a high volume shop or a small volume shop? By the way, there's no right or wrong answer here, but you better know what you are so that you can build your business and build your cost structure accordingly. What about your margins? When we talk about margins, I mean your contribution margin. What is it that you sell? How do you sell it? Are you a high margin shop or a low margin shop? By example, if you start the conversation off by saying, well, we have very low margins and very low volumes, I'm going to be really, really concerned. Your answers here need to kind of make some sense as your business model holds together. The next issue is revenue drivers. How many different ways do you make a buck? If your answers so far are we're low volume, low margin, and we have just one revenue driver, I already know where this conversation is going. It's going to be a short one, okay? But you need to be able to speak to the issue of how many different ways do you make money? Ideally, the more the better. And ideally, you've got some decent margins. Now, it doesn't mean, however, that you have to have the right answer to all of these questions. It doesn't mean that you have to be high across the board. That's not the case either. There are very successful businesses that are low volume, high margin enterprises with lots of revenue drivers. But you need to be able to speak to this. The last part of the economic model is what we call operating leverage. This is perhaps the most complicated and confusing part of the issue. When we talk about operating leverage, I'm not talking about it from a financial accounting sense, but rather operating from the standpoint of what kind of costs your business has. If you have primarily lots of fixed costs, it is said that you are a high operating leverage company. If you have comparatively few fixed costs, you're a low operating leverage company. Now, there's no right or wrong here, but you need to know what you are so that you can structure your business accordingly. By example, if you're high operating leverage, meaning you have a lot of fixed costs, then odds are your break even is going to be higher. Therefore, you are likely to be a higher risk enterprise. That sounds bad. But on the flip side of that is once you break even, you're also going to be more profitable because you have fewer variable costs for each incremental sale, so that you're able to trade that off from a higher risk business initially to one that's highly profitable at the back end. So conversely, if you are a low operating leverage business, meaning you have lots of variable costs, your break even will likely be lower. You have less risk, but you also have lower profitability in the long run. Guys, you need to be conversational about this stuff. You need to have looked at your business. Take a look at those slides that Deanna is sharing. But you need to be conversational in how this all fits together so that when you speak to Eva and you walk in and not only explain to her everything that you want to borrow money for and how you're going to spend that money, but you also need to convince Eva so that when she walks away from the conversation, she says, boy, you know, that Ken, he really understands his business. He's really takes the time to understand it, and he's a true expert at it. You want Eva to believe that. And part of that is to explain to Eva how your business functions. You don't want to say to Eva each time she asks you a financial question, geez, let me get back to you on that. I need to talk to my CPA first because he takes all the receipts out of the shoebox at the end of the year and makes it all pretty. You don't be that person. You have to be, as an entrepreneur, you have to be on top of your economics and your economic model. Sorry, I'll get off the soapbox now, but hopefully that's paralleling a lot of what Neil Tarallo talked about.
Yes, thank you very much. And actually, Helena has another question concerning the model.
Yes, so in the video, it was saying that you need to know when and how you break even. So for startup companies, do you need to know that break even amount per month, per quarter, or is it per year? And if you are doing it per month, are you then guesstimating or putting in there all of the costs right down to the electricity and the water bills that you have to pay on that facility?
Eva, would you like to tag onto this?
Yeah, I would say know it at different increments. Know it annually as a forecast, know it quarterly, know it monthly. You can know it daily depending on the type of business that you run. Because essentially when you're coming up with that figure, so that's, you know, what does it take for you to cover all of your expenses and just go $1 over? You're projecting that out, and it's simply a function of division to determine, well, what do you need to bring in quarterly to kind of cover, you know, that nut, if you will. And, you know, I always say, like, especially if you think, I think the easiest example is a restaurant, right? Wouldn't it be great for you to know as a business owner, as a restaurant, how much do you need to sell every day to cover your expenses? And it's simply dividing, right? And it's just, hey, you start off with, hey, here's my annual forecast. This is what I think I'm gonna, you know, make. I know what my expenses are, right, for the year. And then, you know, that means I got to sell this every month, quarter, and so forth and so on. So I think the more granular, at least for me and the way that I think, you know, I like to keep an eye on things. And I think one thing that I've seen, you know, as a career as a banker is that business owners sometimes wait really late to kind of look at how they've been performing. So if you wait until 10 months into a cycle or a year, and then you finally realize, like, wait, I'm not making money. I'm a little short. That's not particularly helpful. So if you kind of keep a handle on it, you know, as often as a weekly basis, I think that's really helpful. So that means you've got to have good financial accounting systems in place so that you can easily pull that number up and see where you are.
If I could just tag on to that, Helena. Is it Helena or Helena? I apologize.
It's Helena.
All right. So I put a couple of formulas in the chat screen for you. One is the break even. It's a calculation for you to figure out. Is break even equals your fixed costs, that's your annual fixed costs, divided by your contribution margin. What is your contribution margin? It's going to be the sale price of your product minus its variable unit costs. So as a result, you're able to kind of predict when you might be able to break even. Take, for example, a hypothetical coffee shop. Let's say you had one type of coffee, large grande black coffee, and you sell it for $3 a piece. And you have 50 cents worth of variable cost in there between the coffee and the cup and the lid and all the rest of the water and everything else. Your contribution margin, therefore, is $3 minus 50 cents. Your contribution margin is $2.50. If you have $1 million of fixed costs for that coffee shop, you can take $1 million divided by $2.50, and that will tell you how many cups of coffee you need to sell to break even for the year. Okay, it's just another way of approaching it mathematically as to what Eva was describing.
And I'm assuming that companies still do amortization for when they purchase big units like manufacturing equipment. They still amortize that over the life of either the loan or the usability of the machine, and that goes into your fixed costs.
Sounds like you're an accounting major, girlfriend.
I was not. I was a marketing major.
Yeah, you're talking about generally accepted accounting principles. If you've got a fixed asset, you're going to depreciate it, not amortize it. You're going to depreciate it over its tax life or its useful life, whichever is less typically. And that's an expense in your annual financials. But I'm sure we're going down a rabbit hole here. We probably
No, I asked that because I would like to manufacture my own item, and I'm trying to determine the difference in the cost between me going to a bank and trying to get money to buy that equipment, or me shipping the product off to be made by someone else until we've made enough money to buy our own equipment. Trying to determine which one is better.
So you're talking about outsourcing.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Right. If I can, if you remember my conversation a few minutes ago about the economic model of your business, remember we talked about operating leverage? If you were going to build your own manufacturing facility, you're going to have a lot of fixed costs, right? And it might in the long run be a better way to do things, but it might also increase your chances of failure early on. You can adjust your operating leverage by outsourcing. You can take that formerly fixed cost, turn it into a variable cost by having someone else manufacture it and just buy in what you need. And therefore, you can get through those earlier risky days, get your business established, and then down the road, change your stripes yet again and become a manufacturer and do it in-house.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
That's exactly right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So we are getting close to our time. I don't have any more new questions in the chat. I do have a question that I'd like to ask you both to kind of finish this out. But as they're answering, if anyone has another question, feel free to just put it into the chat there. So just kind of an easier question, so to speak, that I kind of ask at the end of each of our webinars. And that would be if you could recommend either a book, an article, video, or resource, something for this class to watch or read or look at, what would that be?
I'll start, and gosh, I wish I had time to prepare, so I'll just come with the first thing that comes in mind. So while this class is about like financials, business, at the end of the day, you've got to sell to people. And one of the books that I always go back to and read periodically is How to Win Friends and Influence People. And that can not only apply like to customers, but it also applies to everyone else in your business network. So it's really about how do you make sure that, you know, you're building those meaningful relationships, you're pouring into them as a business owner, but making sure that you're getting what you need out of that. So I think sales as an entrepreneur is super key. You know, you can have great financial acumen, but if you can't bring in the revenue, then it's not particularly helpful. So I'll just leave with that. Thank you.
Eva, that's profound. I mean, that book was published about 300 years ago, right? I'm kidding, of course, but it's an old book, and every word of it is still appropriate today. So I would echo Eva's comments with regard to that book. I want to go in a different direction slightly. I want you guys to, and Eva, please forgive me when I say it this way. I'm not sure if I'm using my words correctly, but I want you to realize that financing is more than just going to your local bank. That banks are a great resource and they're worthy of all the acclaim that they get, but they're not the only game in town. And as an entrepreneur, you owe it to yourself and your business's financial strategy to be as knowledgeable about all your different alternatives as possible. So where do you go for that? There is no singular book that I'm aware of that says this is all of your financial panoply of options. What I would tell you, however, is to go to entrepreneur.com, go to Forbes.com, businessinsider.com, and just tag in the search phrase non-traditional funding, all right, or funding options, and see what comes up. And you're going to see, as many people found out with me with regard to factoring of invoices, that there's a lot of alternatives out there besides just going down the block to the bank. And while going down the block to the bank might eventually be your best option, it may not be your best option today. So be smart about it, be strategic about it, be informed.
Thank you both very much. And with that, I don't see any other remaining questions, and we are right on our time. So it'll be great to end right on time today. I just want to thank you both, Ken and Eva, for joining us today. I know this class is at a very pivotal point in their business endeavors, and the knowledge that they've been able to receive in the questions have just been, really can't put a price tag on it. And so I just thank you both for your time and investment in this program and in many of the programs that we do at IVMF. So please let me know if any of the class has remaining questions, or if you're watching this video and weren't able to be on our live session and you do have questions for Eva or Ken, please send them, post them in Ask the Expert on Blackboard, and I'll make sure I get these questions to them via email and get those answered. They're such great resources for our program. So again, I just say thank you very much. Very much enjoyed this, and have a good week, everyone. Thank you so much, Ken and Eva.
So long.
Bye.